Part 3. I soon discovered that Fritz found the weight of his canes considerably more than he had expected. He shifted them from shoulder to shoulder, then for a while carried them under his arm, and finally stopped short with a sigh. I had no idea, he said, a few reeds would be so heavy. How sincerely I pity the poor African Americans who are made to carry heavy loads of them. Yet how glad I shall be when my mother and brothers are tasting them. Never mind, my boy, I said. Patience and courage. Do you not remember the story of Aesop and his breakfast? How heavy he found it when he started, and how light at the end of his journey. Let us each take a fresh staff, and then fasten the bundle crosswise with your gun. We did so, and once more stepped forward. Fritz presently noticed that I, from time to time, sucked at the end of my cane. "Oh, come," he said, "that's a capital plan of yours, father. I'll do it too." So saying, he began to suck most vigorously, but not a drop of that juice could he extract. "How is this?" he asked. "How do you get the juice out, father?" "Think a little," I replied. "You are quite as capable as I am of finding out the way, even if you do not know the real reason of your failure." "Oh, of course," he says. "It is like trying to suck marrow from a marrow bone without making a hole at the other end." "Quite right," I said. "You form a vacuum in your mouth and the end of your tube and extract the air to force down the liquid from the other end, which it cannot possibly enter." Fritz was speedily perfect in the accomplishment of sucking sugar cane, discovering by experience the necessity for a fresh cut at each joint or knot in the cane, through which the juice could not flow. He talked of the pleasure of initiating his brothers in this art, and of how Ernest would enjoy the coconut milk with which he had filled his flask. M. Weiss's acquaintance with sugar has not extended to the sugar cane. The sap does not flow, it is embedded in a very fibrous pulp, and the cane must be crushed, and its juice cooked and repeatedly refined to make the sugar. People enjoying the cane in its natural state must chew the pulp, which is not particularly sweet. "My dear boy," said I, "you need not have added that to your load. The chances are it will be vinegar by the time we get home. In the heat of the sun it will ferment soon after being drawn from the nut." "Vinegar? Oh, that would be a horrid bore. I must look directly and see how it is getting on," cried Fritz, hastily swinging the flask from his shoulder and tugging out of the cork with a loud pop. The contents came forth, foaming like champagne. "There now," said I, laughing as he tasted this new luxury. "You will have to exercise moderation again, friend Fritz. I dare say it is delicious, but it will go to your head if you venture deep into the flask. My dear father, you cannot think how good it is. Do take some. Vinegar, indeed. This is like some excellent wine." We were both invigorated by this unexpected draught, and went on so merrily after it that the distance to the place where we had left our gourd dishes seemed less than we had expected. We found them quite dry and very light and easy to carry, just as we had passed through the grove in which we breakfasted. Turk suddenly darted away from us and sprang furiously among a troop of monkeys, which were gambolling playfully on the turf at a little distance from the trees. They were taken by surprise completely, and the dog, now really ravenous from hunger, had seized one, and was fiercely tearing it to pieces before we could approach the spot. His luckless victim was the mother of a tiny little monkey, which, being on her back when the dog flew at her, had hindered her flight. The little creature attempted to hide among the grass, and in trembling fear watched the tragic fate of its mother. On perceiving Turk's bloodthirsty design, Fritz had eagerly rushed to the rescue, flinging away all he was carrying and losing his hat in his haste. all to no purpose as far as the poor mother ape was concerned, and a laughable scene ensued. For no sooner did the young monkey catch sight of him that at one bound it was on his shoulder, and holding fast by his thick curly hair. It firmly kept its seat in spite of all he could do to dislodge it. He screamed, and he plunged about, and he endeavored to shake or pull the creature off, but all in vain. It only clung the closer to his neck, making the most absurd grimaces. I laughed so much at this ridiculous scene that I could scarcely assist my terrified boy out of his awkward predicament. Indeed, I told Fritz that the animal, having lost its mother, seemed determined to adopt Fritz. Perhaps he has discovered in you something of the air of a father of a family. Or rather, Fritz retorted, the little rogue has found out that he has to do with the chicken heart, who shrinks from the idea of ill-treating an animal which has thrown itself on his protection. But, father, he is yanking my hair terribly, and I shall be obliged to you to try once more to get him off. At last, by coaxing the monkey, offering it a bit of biscuit, and gradually disentangling its small, sinewy paws from his curls, it grasped so tightly, I managed to relieve poor Fritz, who then looked with interest at the baby ape, no bigger than a kitten, as it lay in my arms. "What a jolly little fellow it is!" exclaimed he. "Do let me try to rear him, father. I dare say coconut milk would do until we can bring the cow and the goats from the wreck. If he lives, he might be useful to us. I believe monkeys instinctively know what fruits are wholesome and what are poisonous." Well said, Well said, I. Let the little orphan be yours. You bravely and kindly exerted yourself to save the mother's life. Now you must train her child carefully, for unless you do so, its natural instinct will prove mischievous instead of useful to us. Turk was meanwhile devouring with great satisfaction the little animal's unfortunate mother. Fritz wished to drive him away from the feast, but I could not grudge it him, and reminded Fritz that continued hunger might have made Turk dangerous to ourselves. We did not think it necessary to wait until he had dined, so we prepared to resume our march, conversing as we walked. "Let me remind you," I said, "in our situation, it would be dangerous to teach the dogs not to attack and kill, if they can, whatever unknown animal they meet. You will see that he will soon regard your little monkey as a member of our family. But we must not discourage him from his fancy for attacking wild beasts. Heaven has bestowed the dog on a man to be his safeguard and ally, and the horse the same. A man on horseback, accompanied by a troop of well-trained dogs, need not fear any species of wild beasts, not even the lion nor the hyena." Thoughtfully, Fritz replied, "I feel fortunate we are in this possession of two such creatures. But what a pity that the horses on board died during our voyage, and left us with only an ass. Let us take care how we treat even our ass with disdain." I told him, "I wish we had him safe on land. Fortunately, he is large and strong. We may train him to do us the same service as are performed by the horse, and it is not improbable that he will improve under our care, given the excellent pasture we will find in this climate." The tiny ape seated itself in the coolest way imaginable on Fritz's shoulders. I helped to carry his canes, and we were on some distance before Turk overlooked us, looking uncommonly well pleased, and licking his chops as though recalling the memory of his feast. He took no notice of the monkey, but it was very uneasy at sight of him, and scrambled down into Fritz's arms, which was so inconvenient to him that he devised a plan to relieve himself of his burden. Calling Turk, and seriously enjoining obedience, he seated the monkey on his back, securing it there with a cord, and then putting a second string around the dog's neck that he might lead him. He put a loop of the knot into a comical rider's hand, saying gravely, "Having slayed the parent, Mr. Turk, you will please to carry the son." At first this arrangement mightily displeased them both, but by and by they yielded to it quietly. The monkey especially amused us by riding along with the air of a person perfectly at his ease. We looked just like a couple of mountebanks on their way to a fair with animals to exhibit, said I. What an outcry the children will make when we appear. My son inquired to what species of the monkey tribe I thought his protege belonged, which led to a good deal of talk on the subject. And conversation beguiling the way, we found ourselves ere long on the rocky margin of the stream and close to the rest of our party. Juno was the first to be aware of our approach, and gave notice of it by loud barking, to which Turk replied with such hearty goodwill that his little rider, terrified at the noise his steed was making, slipped from under the cord and fled to his refuge on Fritz's shoulder, where he regained his composure and settled himself comfortably. Turk, who by this time knew where he was, finding himself free, dashed forward to rejoin his friend, and announced our coming. One after another our dear ones came running to the opposite bank, testifying in various ways their delight at our return, and hasting up on their side of the river as we on ours, to the ford at which we had crossed in the morning. We were quickly on the other side, and full of joy and affection. Our happy party was once more united. The boys suddenly perceiving the little animal which was clinging close to their brother, in alarm at the tumult of voices, shouted in ecstasy, "A monkey! A monkey! Oh, how splendid! Where did Fritz find him? What may we give him to eat? Oh, what a bundle of sticks! Look at those curious great nuts, father, he has got." He could neither check this confused torrent of questions nor get in a word in answer to them. At length, when the excitement subsided a little, I was able to say a few words, with a chance of being listened to. "I am truly thankful to see you all safe and well, and thank God our expedition has been very satisfactory, except that we have entirely failed to discover any trace of our shipmates." If it be the will of God," said my wife, "to leave us alone on the solitary place, let us be content, and rejoice that we all together in safety. I have been uneasy since you left, and imagined 1,000 evils that might beset you. The day appeared an age, but now I see you once more safe and well. I know how foolish my fears must seem. Now we want to hear all about your adventures, and let us relieve you of your burdens," added she, taking my game bag. Jack shouldered my gun, Ernest took the coconuts, and little Franz carried the gourds. Fritz disturbed the sugar canes amongst his brothers, and handing Ernest his gun, replaced the monkey on Turk's back. Ernest soon found the burden with which Fritz had laden him too heavy to his taste. His mother, perceiving this, offered to relieve him of part of the load. He willingly gave up the coconuts, but no sooner had he done so than his elder brother exclaimed, "Hullo, Ernest, you surely do not know what you are parting with. Did you really intend to hand over those good coconuts with so much as tasting them?" "What? Oh, are you really coconuts? Are they really coconuts?" cried Ernest. "I thought they were bowls. Do let me take them again, mother. Do let me look at them." "No, thank you," replied my wife, with a smile. "I have no wish to see you again overburdened. Oh, but I have only to throw away these sticks, which are of no use, and, and then I can easily carry them." "Worse and worse," said Fritz. "I have a particular regard for those heavy, useless sticks. Did you ever hear of sugar cane?" The words were scarcely out of his mouth when Ernst began to suck vigorously at the end of the cane, with no better result. However, Fritz had obtained as we were on the march. "Here," said Fritz, "let me show you the trick of it," and he speedily set up all the youngsters to work extracting the luscious juice. My wife, as a prudent housekeeper who made much use of sugar, was no less delighted than the children with this discovery. The sight of the dishes also pleased her greatly, for she longed to see us eat once more like civilized beings. We went into the kitchen and there found preparations for a truly sumptuous meal. Two forked sticks were planted in the ground on either side of the fire. On these rested a rod from which hung several tempting looking fish. Opposite them hung a goose from a similar contrivance, slowly roasting while the gravy dropped into a large shell placed beneath it. Franz gave the spit another turn, assuring me he had been helping all day to keep the meal from burning. In the center sat a great pot from which issued the smell of the most delicious soup. To crown this splendid array stood an open hogshead full of Dutch cheeses. All this was very pleasant to two hungry travelers, but I was about to beg my wife to spare the poultry until our stock should have increased, when she, perceiving my thought, quickly relieved my anxiety. "This is not one of our geese," she said, "but a wild bird Ernest killed." "Yes," said Ernest, "it is a penguin, I think. It let me get quite close, so that I knocked it on its head with a stick. Here are here are its head and feet, which I preserve to show you. The bill is, you see, narrow and curved downwards, and the feet are webbed. It had a funny it had funny little bits of useless wings, and its eyes looked solemnly and sedately at me, that I almost that I was almost ashamed to kill it. It seemed quite destitute of any intelligence, so that I was able to kill it with a single blow from my stick. Do you not think it must have been a penguin? I have little doubt on the matter, my boy, and I was about to make a few remarks on the habits of this bird when my wife interrupted me and begged us to come to dinner and continue our natural history conversation at some future time. Fritz now suddenly recollected his delicious wine, and producing his flask, begged his mother to taste it. "Try it first yourself," said I. Fritz did so, and I instantly saw by his countenance that the liquor had passed through the first stage of fermentation and had become vinegar. "Never mind, my boy," said my prudent wife, when she learned the cause of his wiry face. "We have wine already, but no vinegar. I am really pleased at the transformation. Mixed with the fat which has fallen from our bird with roasting, it will make a most delicious sauce, which will be as good a relish as a salad." And so it proved, as a corrective of the wild, fishy flavor of the penguin, as well as improving the taste of the fish. We did full justice to the appetizing meal prepared for us, our gourds coming for the first time into use, and having done it full justice, I produced the coconuts by way of dessert. "Here is better food for your little friend," said I to Fritz, who had been vainly endeavoring to persuade the monkey to taste dainty morsels of food we had been eating. The poor little animal had been accustomed to nothing but its mother's milk. "Fetch me a saw, one of you." I then, after extracting the milk or the nuts from the several holes, carefully cut the shells in half, thus providing several more useful basins. The monkey was perfectly satisfied with the milk, and eagerly sucked the corner of the handkerchief dipped in it. The sun was now rapidly sinking behind the horizon, and the poultry, retiring for the night, warned us that we must follow their example. Having offered up our prayers, we lay down on our beds. The monkey crouched down between Jack and Fritz, and we were all soon fast asleep. We did not, however, long enjoy this repose. A loud barking from our dogs, who were on guard outside the tent, awakened us, and the fluttering and cackling of our poultry warned us that a foe was approaching. Fritz and I sprang up, and seizing our guns, rushed out. There we found a desperate combat going on. Our gallant dogs, surrounded by a dozen or more large jackals, were fighting bravely. Four of their opponents lay dead. but the others in no way deterred by their fate of their comrades. Fritz and I, however, sent bullets through the heads of a couple more. The rest galloped off. Turk and Juno did not intend that they should escape so cheaply and pursued them. They caught, killed, and devoured another of the animals. Regardless of their near relationship, Fritz wished to save one of the jackals that he might be able to show it to his brothers in the morning, dragging therefore the one that he had shot near the tent. He concealed it, and we once were returned to our beds. I told him that in justice, if Turk and Flora were still hungry, we should give this last jackal to them. But they surfeit, curled up to sleep. Soundly and peacefully we slept until cock crowed next morning, when my wife and I awoke. I observed to her that I could not but view with alarm the many cares and exertions to be made. In the first place, a journey to the vessel must be made. This is of absolute necessity, at least if we would not be deprived of the livestock for the other useful things, all of which from moment to moment we risk losing by the first heavy sea. What ought we first to resolve on? For example, should not our very endeavor to be contriving of a better sort of habitation, and more secure retreat from wild beasts, as well as a separate place for our provisions? I own I am at a loss what to begin first. Return to the wreck by all means, replied my wife, cheerfully. Patience, order, and perseverance will help us through all our work, and I agree with you that our visit to the wreck is without a doubt our first duty. Come, let us wake the children and set to work without delay. They were soon roused. Fritz, overcoming his drowsiness before the others, ran out for his jackal. It was cold and stiff from the night air, and he placed it on its legs before the tent, in the most lifelike attitude, and stood by to watch the effect upon the family. The dogs the dogs were the first to perceive their enemy, and growling seemed inclined to dispose of the animal as they had disposed of his brethren in the night. But Fritz called them off. The noise the dogs made, however, had the effect of bringing out the younger children, and many were the exclamations they made at the sight of the strange animal. "A yellow dog!" cried Franz. "A wolf!" exclaimed Jack. "It's a striped fox," said Ernest. "Hullo!" said Fritz. "The greatest men may make mistakes. Our professor does not know a jackal when he sees one. But really," continued Ernest, examining the animal, "I think it is a fox." "I think it is a fox." Very well, retorted Fritz. "No doubt you know better than your father. He thinks it's a jackal." "Come, boys," said I, "no more of this quarreling. You are none of you very far wrong, for the jackal partakes of the nature of all three, dog, wolf, and fox." The monkey had come out on Jack's shoulder, but no sooner did it catch sight of the jackal than it fled precipitately back to the tent, and hid itself in a heap of moss until nothing was visible but the tip of its little nose. Jack soothed and comforted the frightened little boy, the frightened little animal, and I then summoned them all to prayers, soon after which we began our breakfast. So severely had we dealt with our supper the previous night that we had little to eat but the biscuits which were so hard and dry, that hungry as we were, we could not swallow much. Fritz and I took some cheese to help them down, while my wife and younger son soaked theirs in water. Ernest roamed down to the shore and looked about for shellfish. Presently he returned with a few whelks. "Ah," said he, "if we had just had some butter." "My good boy," I replied, "your perpetual if quite annoys me. I would rather eat a bit of cheese with my biscuit at once than think of ifs, which brings us so meager a harvest. Why do you not sit down and eat cheese like the rest of us?" "Not while I can get butter," he said. "See here, father." He pointed to a large cask. The barrel contained excellent salt butter. I made a little opening in it with a knife, and see, I got enough to spread nicely upon this piece of biscuit. Really, Ernest, I said, we are indebted to you. I will open the cask. So saying, I took a knife and carefully cut a small hole, so that I could extract the butter without exposing the mass of it to the effects of the air and the heat. Filling a coconut shell with a good Dutch butter, we once more sat down, toasting our biscuits before the fire and spreading them with butter. While we were thus employed, I noticed the two dogs were lying unusually quiet by my side. I at first attributed this drowsiness to their large meal during the night, but I soon discovered that it arose from a different cause. The faithful animals had not escaped unhurt in their late night combat, but had received several deep and painful wounds, especially about the neck. The dogs began to lick each other on the places which they could not reach with their own tongues, and my wife carefully dressed the wounds with butter from which she had extracted the salt by washing. One of the things we must not forget to look for in the vessel, said Fritz, is a spiked collar for each of the dogs, as a protection should to them should they again be called upon to defend themselves and us from wild beasts. Oh, yes, explained Jack, but I can make a spike collars, if mother will give me some help. Try by all means, my little fellow, said I, and persuade your mother to assist you. And now, Fritz, I continued, we must be starting, for you and I are to make a trip to the wreck. That I will, my boy, she cried, for I would be like to see what new fancy has come into your head. And all of us must remember that we may make as many new inventions as we can think of. We cannot better employ our time, and if you produce something useful, you will be rewarded with commendations and all. I begged the party who were to remain on shore to keep together as much as possible, reminded my younger sons to obey their mother in all things, and having arranged a set of signals with my wife that we might exchange communications. Asking a blessing on our enterprise, I erected a signal post, and while Fritz was making preparations for our departure, hoisted a strip of sailcloth as a flag. This flag was to remain hoisted so long as all was well on shore, but should our return be desired, 3 shots were to be fired and the flag lowered. All was now ready, and warning my wife that we might find it necessary to remain all night on the vessel, we tenderly bade adieu and embarked. Except our guns and ammunition, we were taking nothing, and that we might leave as much space as possible for the stowage of the large cargo. Fritz, however, had resolved to bring his, oops, sorry, lost my blades. Fritz, however, had resolved to bring his little monkey that he might obtain milk for it as soon as possible. We had not got far from shore when I perceived that a current from the river set in directly for our vessel, and though my nautical knowledge was not great, I succeeded in steering the boat into the favorable stream, which carried us nearly 3/4 of our passage with little or no trouble to ourselves. Then, by dint of hard pulling, we accomplished the whole distance, and entering through the breach, gladly made our fast our boat and stepped on board. Our first care was to see to the animals, who greeted us with joy, lowing, bellowing, and bleating as we approached. Not that the poor beasts were hungry, for they were all still well supplied with food, but they were apparently pleased by the mere sight of human beings. We removed any partly spoiled food and added a fresh supply, along with fresh water. Fritz then placed his monkey by one of the goats, and the little animal immediately suckled the milk the evident relish, chattering, grinning all the while the monkey provided for. We refreshed ourselves with a plentiful meal. Now, said I, we have plenty to do. Where shall we begin? Let us fix a mast and sail our boat, answered Fritz, for the current which brought us out will not take us back, whereas the fresh breeze we met would help us immensely, but but a sail. Quite startled, I demanded, what makes you think of this at so crucial a time? when we have so many necessities to attend to? I must confess, he said, that I found it very difficult to row for so long a time, though I assure you I did my best and did not spare my strength. I noticed that through the wind blew strong in my face towards land. The current continued to carry us out. Now, as the current will be of no use on our way back, I was thinking that we might make the wind supply its place. Our boat will be very heavy when we have loaded it with all the things we mean to take away, and I am afraid that I shall not be strong enough to row to land. You, you have reasoned well, my boy, I replied, and let us set to work at once. Even so, we must care not to overload the boat, as that might risk our sinking or force us to throw supplies overboard. I chose start I choose a stout spar to serve as a mast, and having made a hole in a plank nailed across one of the tubs, we, with the help of a rope and a couple of blocks, stepped it and secured it with stays. Then we discovered a lug sail, which had belonged to one of the ship's boats. This we hoisted, and our craft was ready to sail. Fritz begged me to decorate the masthead with a red streamer, to give our vessel a more finished appearance. Smiling at his childish but natural vanity, I complied with his request. I then contrived a rudder that I might be able to steer the boat, for though I knew that an oar would serve the purpose, it was cumbrous and inconvenient. While I was thus employed, Fritz remained with the shore with his glass, and soon announced that the flag was flying and all was well. So much time had slipped away that we found we could not return that night, as I had wished. We signaled our intention of remaining on board, and then spent the rest of our time in taking out the stones we had placed in the boat for ballast, and stowed in the place heavy articles of value to us. The ship had sailed for the purpose of supplying a young colony. She had therefore on board every conceivable article we could desire in our present situation. Our only difficulty, indeed, was to make a wise selection. Fritz seemed sanguine that would be able to return for more, but that I was far from certain. A large quantity of powder and shot we first secured, as has and as Fritz considered that we could not have too many weapons. We added 3 excellent guns and a whole armful of swords, daggers, and knives. We remembered that knives and forks and spoons were necessary. We therefore laid in a large stock of them, and kitchen utensils of all sorts. Exploring the captain's cabin, we discovered a service of silver plate and a cellaret of good old wine. We then went over the stores and supplied ourselves with potted meats, portable soup, and Westphalian ham, sausages, a bag of maize and wheat, and a quantity of other seeds and vegetables. I then added a barrel of sulphur for matches and as much string and cordage and sailcloth as I could find. Fritz reminded me that sleeping on the ground, even with the leaves and moss the boys had collected, had been both cold and hard, and prevailed upon me to increase our cargo by some hammock and blankets. All this, with nails, tools, agricultural implements, completed our cargo, and sank our boat so low that I shall have been obliged to lighten her, but not the sea been calm. Night drew on, and a large fire, lighted by those on shore, showed us that all was well. We replied by hoisting 4 ship's lanterns, and 2 shots announced us as our signal was perceived. The ship seemed to be so wretched a condition that the least tempest, such as might arise unexpectedly during the night, must complete her destruction. We resigned ourselves to sleeping in our small boat, which appeared safer than the great vessel. So, with a heartfelt prayer for the safety of our dear ones on shore, we retired, and Fritz, at all events, was soon sound asleep. For a while I could not sleep. The thought of my wife and children alone and unprotected, save by the great dogs, disturbed my rest. The night at length passed away. At daybreak, Fritz and I arose and went on deck. I brought the telescope to bear upon the shore, and with pleasure saw the flag still waving in the morning breeze. While I kept the glass directed toward the land, I saw the door of the tent open, and my wife appeared and looked steadfastly towards us. I at once hoisted, seemed lifted from my heart as I saw the signal. Fritz, I said, now that I have had sight of your mother, my next concern is for the animals on board. Let us endeavor to save the lives of some of them at least, and to take them with us. Would it be possible to make a raft, suggested Fritz, and get them all on it, and in that way take them to shore? But how could we induce a cow, an ass, and a sow either to get upon a raft, or then where to remain motionless and quiet? The sheep and goats one might perhaps find means to remove, they being the more docile temper, but for the larger animals I am at a loss as to how to proceed. We could tie a long rope around the sail's neck, Fritz now proposed, and throw her without ceremony into the sea. Her immense bulk will be sure to sustain her above water, and by the rope we can draw her after the boat. An excellent idea, I replied, but unfortunately it is of no use but for the pig, and she is the one I care least about preserving. In fact, I had an idea how to proceed, but I desire to allow Fritz to invent a solution. In fact, of all the animals would have been able to float through swimming against a strong current would have been difficult. The solution chosen does not address this problem at all. Well, said Fritz, I can think of nothing else, unless indeed we make them such swimming belts as you made for the children. Really, my boy, that idea is worth having. I am not joking, indeed. I continued as I saw him smile. We may get every one of these animals ashore in that way. So saying, I caught a fine sheep and proceeded to put our plan into execution. I first fastened a broad piece of linen around its belly, and to this attached some cork and empty tins. Then, with Fritz's help, I flung the animal into the sea. It sank, but a moment afterward rose and floated famously. Hurrah! Exclaimed Fritz. We will treat them all like that. We then rapidly caught the other animals and provided them one after the other with a similar contrivance. The cow and ass gave us more trouble than did the others. For them, we required something more buoyant than the mere cork. We were at last found some empty casks and fastened two to each animal by thongs passed under its belly. This done, the whole herd were ready to start, and we brought the ass to one of the ports to be the first to be launched. After some maneuvering, we got him to in a convenient position, and then sudden heave sent him plunging to the sea. He sank, and then, buoyed up by the cask, emerged head back from the water. The cow, sheep, goats followed him one after the other, and then the sow alone remained. She seemed, however, determined not to leave the ship. She kicked, struggled, and squealed so violently that I really thought we should be obliged to abandon her. Indeed, we found it necessary to put a muzzle on her to prevent her from biting before we could tie a large piece of cork under her body. At length, after much trouble, we succeeded in sending her out of the port after the others, and when once in the water, such was the old lady's energy that she quickly distanced them, and was the first to reach the shore. We had fastened to the horns or neck of each animal a cord with a float attached to the end, and now embarking, we gathered up these floats, set sail, and steered for shore. Drawing our herd after us, I saw now how impossible it would have been for us to have succeeded in our enterprise without the aid of a sail. The weight of the goods sank the boat so low in the water that none of our exertions would have allowed us to row such a distance. But with the sail, we proceeded so completely to our satisfaction that we're able to get some biscuits and enjoy a midday meal. Then, while Fritz amused himself with his monkey, I took up my glass and tried to make out how our dear ones on shore were employing themselves. As I was thus engaged, a sudden shout from Fritz surprised me. I glanced up. There stood Fritz with his gun on his shoulder, pointing it at a huge shark. The monster was making for one of the finest sheep. He turned on its sides to seize his prey As the white of his belly appeared, Fritz fired. The shot took the shot took effect, and our enemy disappeared, leaving a trace of blood on the calm water. Well done, my boy, I cried. You will become a crack shot one of these days. But I trust you will not often have such dangerous game to shoot. Fritz's eyes sparkled at his success and my praise, and reloading his gun. Carefully watched the water, but the shark did not appear again, and borne onwards by the breeze, we quickly neared the shore. Steering the boat to a convenient landing place, I cast off the ropes which secured the animals and let them get ashore as best they might. There was no sign of my wife or children when we stepped on land, but a few moments afterwards they appeared and, with a shout of joy, ran towards us. We were thankful to be once more united, and after asking and replying to a few preliminary questions, proceeded to release our herd from the swimming belts, which, though so useful in the water, were exceedingly inconvenient on shore. My wife was astonished at the apparatus. How clever you are, she said. I am not the inventor, I replied. The honor is due to Fritz. He not only thought of this plan for bringing off the animals, but saved one, at least of them, from the most fearful death. And I then told them how bravely he had encountered the shark. My wife was delighted with her son's success, but declared that she would dread our trips to the vessel more than ever, knowing that such savage fish inhabited the waters. Fritz, Ernest, and I began to work of unloading our craft, while Jack, seeing the poor donkeys was still encumbered with its swimming belt, tried to free him from it. But the donkey would not stand quiet, and the child's fingers were not strong enough to loosen the cordage. Finally, therefore, he scrambled upon the animal's back and urged him on with his hand and foot, trotted towards us. Come, my boy, I said. No one must be idle here, even for a moment. You will have riding practice enough hereafter. Dismount and come and help us. Jack was soon on his feet. But I have not been idle all day, he said. Look here. And he pointed to a belt around his waist. It was a broad belt of yellow skin in which he had stuck a couple of pistols and a knife. And see, he added, what I have made from for the dogs. Here, Juno, Turk. The dogs came bounding up at his call, and I saw that they were each supplied with a collar of the same skin, in which were fastened nails which bristled around their necks in a most formidable manner. Capital, capital, my boy, said I. Well, where did you get your materials? Who helped you? Except in except except in sewing, said my wife. He had little assistance. As for the materials, Fritz's jackal supplied us with the skin, and the needles and thread came from my wonderful woman's duty and nature, you know, to see after trifles. Fritz evidently did not approve of the use to which his jackal's hide had been devoted, and holding his nose, begged his little brother to keep at a distance. Really, Jack, he said, you should have cured the hide before you used it. The smell is disgusting. Don't come near me. It's not the hide that smells at all, retorted Jack. It is your nasty jackal itself, that you left in the sun. Now, boy, said I, no quarreling here. Do you, Jack, help your brother to drag the carcass to the sea, and if your belt smells after that, you must take it off and dry it better. The jackal was dragged off, and we then finished our work of unloading our boat. When this was accomplished, we started for our tent, and finding there no preparations for supper, I said, Fritz, let us have a Westphalian ham. Ernest, said my wife, smiling, let us see if we cannot conjure up some eggs. Fritz got out a splendid ham and carried it to his mother triumphantly, while Ernest set before me a dozen white balls with parchment-like coverings. Turtle's eggs, said I. Well done, Ernest. Where did you get them? That, replied my wife, shall be told in due course after we relate our adventures. Now we will see what they will do towards making supper for you. With these and your ham, I do not think we shall starve. Leaving my wife to prepare supper, we returned to the shore and brought up what of the cargo we had left there. Then, having collected our herd of animals, except for the sow, which ran away, and the ducks and geese, which deserted us for a nearby swamp, We returned to the tent. The meal which awaited us was unlike the first supper we had enjoyed as possible. My wife had improvised a table of a board laid upon two casks. On this was spread a white damask tablecloth, on which were placed knives, forks, spoons, and plates for each person. A tureen of good soup first appeared, followed by a capital omelette, then slices of ham, and finally some Dutch cheese. Butter and biscuits with a bottle of the captain's Canary wine completed the repast. While we thus regaled ourselves, I related to my wife our adventures, and then begged she would remember her promise and tell me that all that had happened in my absence.